I've also been involved in collectibles, done very well with comic books, actually, in the six-figure return ranges, believe it or not. So paper, other kinds of paper have some serious value if you know what you're doing. But the traditional stocks, bonds, traded options before, I've had NFTs, so on and so forth. And all this has actually led to a couple of very interesting things.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schloe, and I'm so glad that you're here listening to another episode of the podcast. If you have gained anything from the Physicians and Properties Podcast, do me a favor, subscribe so you never miss an episode, and please leave a 5-star rating and review. That is how more physicians get to hear the good news of this podcast and learn how real estate and entrepreneurship can give them the freedom to practice medicine and live life how they want to. Today's podcast episode was fantastic. We covered everything from real estate, cryptocurrency, angel investments, collectibles, and how to change the healthcare industry going forward. Today's guest was Dr. Todd Otten. He is a husband, father, family medicine physician, co-author of an incredible book called The Ripple of Change, and he is focused on how the power of relationships can help you unlearn helplessness. In this episode, we also do talk a lot about burnout, and we talk about some of our thoughts on the healthcare industry. This podcast, as with every episode, is not investment advice. We do talk about some potential investments. This is not investment advice. Please do your due diligence for any investments that you may be considering. And guys, listen to this podcast and buy Todd's book, because he is on an incredible mission to empower physicians and change the healthcare industry in order to better take care of our patients going forward, which is why we all got into medicine. So buy the book Ripple of Change and enjoy this podcast. Without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with Dr. Todd Otten. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have Dr. Todd Otten on the podcast. Todd, how's it going?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Alex.
Absolutely. Super glad to connect. I think I first saw a lot of the things that you were doing on LinkedIn, and you have a really great LinkedIn page, and it was really awesome getting to connect there and see what you're doing and the change that you're able to create in the healthcare industry. And of course, your book, Ripple of Change, and what all that's led to. So really excited to touch on your investing on the podcast today, but also talk about that as well. For folks who don't know who you are, do you mind telling a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I'll keep it short for the audience. I'm a husband, a father of 4, family physician, former naval flight surgeon, co-authored a book with one of my former patients called Ripple of Change, which I'm super proud of. I'm sure I'll hold it up at some point so people can see if it's on video. And then currently I work for a group called Emergency Care Specialists, kind of as a built-in primary care consultant, moving towards a direct care model. Tons of investing experience that is probably all over the map, to be honest with you. And then lots of advocacy work, particularly with the group Medicine Forward, which I'm very proud of their work there. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I figured we'd kind of structure this podcast on investing experience first for kind of the first half. And then we'll hit a Ripple of Change and talk about Medicine Forward and some other cool projects that you're working on towards the end. How's that sound?
Beautiful. I love it.
Awesome. Well, do you mind just kind of giving a brief snapshot for folks who are listening about your investment experience? Because you do have quite a diverse portfolio.
Yeah, it's very unique, I would say. Probably worth saying, I've got a high risk tolerance, and I feel like that's been a blessing in the investing world. Like many of us, I learned my lessons early on, and perhaps lack of due diligence at times and all that kind of thing. But the reality is all those lessons have allowed me to get into some spaces that are newer. And instead of talking about percentage returns, we're talking about X returns, meaning multiples, et cetera. So I've been involved with real estate since about 2010. Predominantly single family homes, however, on the verge of possibly multifamily units with some colleagues, et cetera. Not me operating those necessarily, but more as a silent investor, if you will. But I've also been involved in collectibles, done very well with comic books, actually, in the six-figure return ranges, believe it or not. So paper, other kinds of paper have some serious value if you know what you're doing. But the traditional stocks, bonds, traded options before, I've had NFTs, so on and so forth. And all this has actually led to a couple of very interesting things. One, my friends and I created an investment club which is an eclectic mix, if you will, of high risk assets, predominantly cryptocurrency, but also moving towards possibly some angel investments to help some colleagues get their projects underway. So yeah, a whole variety of things to potentially double click on, I suppose.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I have to hit on the collectibles, the comic books, because I've never heard of that before. Tell us a little bit more about that, a 6-figure return with comic books. That's awesome.
Yeah, so like any asset class, if you will, and I consider collectibles an asset class, to be quite honest with you, it's a supply and demand kind of thing. So when I was a kid, I collected comic books. It was a big part of my reading journey, if you will. And that flame got kindled, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so with a buddy who that's basically his livelihood. And like many things that I do, I don't do it half-ass. I jumped in kind of all the way, and all of a sudden, buying and selling expensive comic books to the point where we created a little club with a seed fund of, I think, $1,200. And over the course of 18 months, that rose to over 6 figures with our buying and selling and trading. It was a fun journey for sure, and just lots of great stories associated with it.
That's awesome. Well, it's really cool when you can also kind of tie in a passion or something that you really enjoy and make money from it too, which is really cool. It sounds like collectibles is a great way to do that. Yeah, I've heard, of course, of folks, buying fine art and those sorts of things and doing really well. I need to look back. I have just a ton of baseball cards from back in the day, and I'm sure some of those are worth a good bit of money as well. I know that I don't know if you're a baseball guy, but Albert Pujols, who's certainly going to be in the Hall of Fame. I have like an autographed uniform card of his, and I'm like, oh man, I bet that's worth cool. So if my dad's listening to this, Dad, I hope you keep all those because they're all at his house right now. So,
Well, actually, I'll give you a tip on that for those listening too. And I hadn't used this until recently. There was always you had the Albert Pujols card with the autograph, and you would do a search and then look for the prices. Well, there's an AI tool called Google Lens, where basically you just hold it up to the item and it'll do a AI search. It's incredible. You'll be able to get a valuation in about 10 seconds.
That's crazy. I'll have to look into that. Dad, hold on to my card. Don't sell it. We'll split it for the storage fees there. But that's awesome. Well, really cool. For real estate, from a real estate perspective, you got into that while you were in the Navy, correct?
That's correct. So like many people in the military, you'll go to your first duty station and buy your first home, which is exactly what we did. And through that process, we learned that a lot of people will then hang on to that home and rent it out. And I had learned that from the flight surgeon that I took over from in VP-10, which was the squadron I was with. And interestingly enough, we kind of were in the housing bubble when we were leaving, if you will. So we would have had done quite well had we sold when we left, but we decided to rent it out. So we wrote it all the way down and then rode it all the way back up. We held on to the home, I guess all told about 16 years. And we actually sold it during the pandemic, interestingly enough. It was on the market for a week. We got an offer above what we listed it for. They never even walked into the house and didn't want an inspection, and it was sold like a month later. It was surreal. And so we've continued on predominantly with having that second home being rented out. And currently we do the same. And it's been a nice way to generate some passive income and also reduce tax burden too. And I'm sure you talk about that all the time, so I won't get into the weeds on that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah. What was it like in 2008, kind of riding the crash? Any thoughts of selling it at a loss? I know folks sometimes try and catch the dropping knife. So what was that like for you as that was going down? Or did you just know like, hey, we got a renter in here, we're cash flowing, we're protected, let's just hold on and go from there?
Probably more of the latter. It was difficult at times during residency, making 40, 45 grand, having 2 mortgages. I mean, some people thought I was insane, but I tend to think long term, with things like this. And I think one of the things you really have to be careful with, depending on where you're at, real estate, like every asset class, you're going to have ebbs and flows, right? And that was a remarkable time in terms of the volatility. And so if you do trading based on pure emotions, you're potentially going to get yourself in trouble with selling at the wrong time or FOMOing into a crypto project or whatever. For those that don't know crypto, fear of missing out. And so you're buying on emotion or selling on emotion, and that's when you make mistakes. So you got to be careful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great feedback. And then you guys have a lake house right in northern Michigan as well?
Correct.
Awesome.
And we've had that for about 7 years. It's been, for those that can afford to do that kind of thing, you talk about some amazing memories with family and friends and letting your family utilize that asset. It's just been an amazing experience.
Yeah, and that's such a cool thing to hit on real quick is kind of lifestyle investments, right? Like not only do you have a lake house, but you also get to enjoy that with family and friends. And so sometimes folks, I feel like, get really wrapped up on, well, what's my like actual cash return on investment, or what's my specific return on investment, but also got to think about your return on happiness and your return on time and getting the ability to spend that time with family and folks you love. I mean, it's priceless. I mean, you can't really put a return on that. And so sometimes it may be a better option or a better investment for your family as a whole to not really focus as much on how much money can I make on this lake house, but also how much return on time, return on happiness, those sorts of things that you can experience as well.
I agree with you 100%, Alex. We can't take it with us, right? And this even speaks maybe to some of the misery that our colleagues are experiencing with their job. They're afraid to make a change. They feel trapped in their current circumstance. And the reality is we can throw a dart as a family physician, throw a dart at the map, and there will be a job probably within just a couple of miles of that area, assuming you didn't throw it into a desert or something. Yeah, I agree with you. So the reality of it is you have to factor in those other things when you're making decisions, not only on investments, but also on jobs, et cetera. Being miserable is, we need to end that. Sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but so I guess I inadvertently flipped that coin. I didn't mean to.
That's okay. We're definitely going to flip the coin here soon, which is great. But yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's where passive income in some capacity can be really helpful. And it takes time to get that passive income where you have that flexibility, but you got to get started. And, the beauty of that is it can be from a bunch of different asset classes. Of course, we hit on real estate a lot on this podcast, but there's other ways to do that too. Some of what you've done and some of what you're experiencing. And that gives you kind of that freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want to. If you have some passive income coming in, it's also a defensive metric, of course. So yeah, just really important from that perspective for folks to understand that. Well, tell us, I don't know really anything about crypto other than Bitcoin, and I think was it Dogecoin though, that was the little dog that my buddy made a ton of money on. Tell us a little bit about crypto for folks who don't know, kind of, if you don't mind sharing, what do you look for in a crypto investment? Because I know it can be a little bit more difficult to analyze.
Yeah, for sure. That's crypto, and it's really about the blockchain, and it's about blockchain technology. And so I'm probably not going to do a complete justice in terms of describing the blockchain, but it's a decentralized ledger validated essentially by math. And it's incredible. And I think what people don't really understand, this isn't about cute looking dogs or weird looking frogs or whatever the garbage is coming out. This is about the technology. Okay. And so there's a couple things here to understand. Bitcoin is a little different. It is considered digital gold. So it's really considered a store of value. But to facilitate a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, you have to pay fees, a gas fee. That fee is generated or paid rather with using Bitcoin, the token. Okay. So that's Bitcoin. Do I think Bitcoin is a great place to put some money? 100%. Those that put money in Bitcoin, I think, will outpace many other asset classes going forward. But you have to understand there's going to be additional volatility. It's not, the whole crypto landscape is not too dissimilar from all those .coms that were coming up when the internet started. There was tons of garbage companies that came out, stocks that went to the moon and then subsequently went to zero. And the same thing's going to happen within the crypto space. However, if you can pick out the winners like Bitcoin, or Ethereum, or some of these other smaller tokens that have utility associated with them, there is a ton of opportunity there. Ethereum is not going away. All the transactions that occur on it, those are permanently recorded. There are countries like Estonia that are starting to put medical records on the blockchain. Real estate, financial transactions, the list goes on and on and on. So instead of somebody having to be a middleman to record all this stuff, you have a permanent record of all kinds of things. So the utility is incredible. I will put in a plug for the token or company that I am very confident in. Full disclosure, I am an investor. The company is called Telcoin, Telcoin. And if you're interested, reach out to me on LinkedIn or look it up. But they are doing, I won't get into the weeds here, but they are doing amazing things, ultimately turning this into your bank with the ability to send money all over the world at a fraction of the cost of what currently is going on. It's going to be an incredible tool. So anyways,
that's awesome.
Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'll just give the disclaimer, not specific investment advice for anyone. Just do your own due diligence and go from there. I'll reach out to Todd about Telcoin. Don't reach out to me. I don't know anything, but I am going to reach out to Todd. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really cool. And I think one thing that's tough about crypto, at least for me, is just kind of wrapping my head around it, right? Like real estate's that very tangible asset. Like we all live in a house and we can see it, we can drive by it, we can, really experience that. In crypto, it's hard to have that experience with it. But I will say, I I think about crypto similar to AI, right? Like if you're not using AI or utilizing the benefits of AI, like your competitor is going to for sure. And I think crypto is a similar way. Like it's something that's, it's not going anywhere. And I think, it's only going to continue to grow. There's been so many times, I do have a little bit of a theory and a little bit of Bitcoin, not nearly as much as I wish I had, but there's been so many times where I'm like, okay, like Bitcoin, when it dropped down to like 12,000 or 20,000 or whatever it was after the pandemic, I was like, well, it's time, let's buy some Bitcoin. And I just can never bring myself to fully pull the trigger. And of course, now it's at like $60,000 or $70,000 and it's only going to keep going up, I think. But it's just, that's just kind of my thoughts on crypto, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. A couple things I'd like to maybe add on to that. When there's blood in the streets or blood in the water, that's the time to be buying. If you've done your due diligence and looking into whatever asset class we're talking about, when other people are panicking, those emotions we talked about earlier, if you have the intestinal fortitude, that's the time to be pulling the trigger. Yeah. And so, I think you're right in terms of AI and the blockchain. Neither one of those entities is going away. And the sooner you sort of learn about it and adopt it, like I've started using AI in terms of patient visits, as I've recently started seeing patients again. What an interesting tool to solidify or confirm your thoughts. Simply just put in differential diagnosis of a complex problem. I wanted to see what it would spit out. And it was amazing because it was like, it took what I was thinking, encapsulated it into like 2 pages and added a couple things that I hadn't fully thought of. But I was like, oh, that makes sense. I should consider that. Just really cool. And maybe one other comment about the blockchain, not to derail it again, but I suppose I can't help myself, is you think about all your banking. Like how much are we actually handing money to anybody for anything anymore? It's all electronic. It's all digital, right?
Right.
But we're not the ones necessarily controlling the middle part. It's banks, it's other big entities. With the blockchain, you are much more in control of your own money. Now, there's not as much security, so there's more risk associated with that, but definitely something to think about.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think that, as you mentioned, the ledger and those sorts of things too, I've talked with some buddies and some big real estate investors. And the thought is like property inspections or, different repairs that you have done, all those sorts of things are going to start being put on the blockchain, almost similar to like a Carfax. And so then, title and the deed and all this stuff. And so then it's all there and it's packaged up and you can literally like do a home fax, if you will, at some point and see, hey, this is everything that's happened to this home in this time period and go from there. So I think there's probably some really cool opportunities and stuff that's coming down the pipeline. And if folks are listening to that and come up with that idea, don't forget about me. But yeah, so I think there's just a lot of cool opportunity with blockchain and with crypto.
For sure.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then angel investments, what does that look like? I wanted to hit on kind of investment club and angel investment. What's that look like for folks who aren't familiar?
Yeah, so in short, the investment club is a cohort of individuals that we set up the infrastructure, we pooled some money together. And in part, it allows individuals that don't have the intestinal fortitude to have exposure to more volatile asset classes. So over the past 3 years, we've really got this very cool infrastructure, develop board structure, all on the up and up, do all the things the right way, LLC, file our taxes, all that kind of jazz. But it allows us to educate, to teach, and to give exposure to people that probably would never get into those kind of things. That's what we're doing with the investment club. It's been a lot of fun. A lot of work, but fun work. Yeah. In terms of angel investing, this is an opportunity if you've got the business acumen and or the capital to potentially help friend, family, colleagues to pursue, whether it's a business or a dream or what have you. I won't get into the weeds on this, but talking with a good friend of mine, Mary Ann Wilbur, she wrote a book called The Doctor Is No Longer In, and we're considering this kind of path related to her book. It just came out about, September of 2024. I don't know when this is going to come out, but it interviews 10 physicians and some of the ongoing issues that exist within healthcare. Very raw, very real, some that have left, some that have come back, some that have stayed, and the reasons why. And people need to know these things because we need an army of positive disruptors to really move this Goliath of a mess that we're dealing with in the healthcare space, if you will. So,
yeah, well, really cool. And if folks, want to reach out and learn a little bit more about that project, we'll be sure to include, of course, links to how folks in contact with you in the show notes. And yeah, let's pivot, Todd, because we could probably spend a lot of time talking about healthcare in our thoughts and so forth. But what is a ripple of change? Give us the 30,000 foot view of the book and, and let's kind of dive into that.
Sure. And I don't know if this is audio or video both, but this is my opportunity to show the cover.
Nice.
So there it is. That I can't help myself. So Ripple of Change is a combined story of myself and one of my former patients, Joshua Judy, who's an amazing individual. Initially, the book was intended to be a bridge between physicians and administrators, to try and bridge that gap that often exists. I started writing it a couple years after I had gone through pretty intense burnout. And so my portion of the book is really the journey of a physician through burnout and how it negatively impacts not just the people close in the circle, but the ripples that go far and wide. The book took a dramatic turn when Joshua got involved. I had written Joshua for a medication with devastating side effects and really even worse consequences when he tried to wean off of it. And when he got involved, the target audience grew tremendously to basically the American healthcare consumer. We weave my journey through burnout, his journey through the mess that I created for him. But as it goes forward, there's a catharsis in the writing that really occurred. And the goal of the book is to inspire and empower everybody to do a little bit of something to make a difference in the healthcare infrastructure, if you will, in the United States. That sounds overly complex. Don't be intimidated. There's a ton of humor. There's a ton of stories. There are stories from me in the Navy. There are stories from me as a physician. There's stories of Joshua. It's different. You don't often see, I'm not sure we've seen anything. Well, I'm obviously biased, but to have a doctor and a patient go back and forth in our relationship and our bond become inseparable at this point through this process, it was fun and amazing. So that was probably way more than you wanted to hear. But
no, that was perfect. That is amazing. And I think, a word that you hit on, relationship, is so important, and especially in family medicine with our patients. Oftentimes it's time limited and takes multiple visits to form that relationship. But relationship's so important in medicine and so important for positive change with our patients. And I'm going to try and not get too much on a soapbox, but I think you can boil down almost everything in life, but also medicine to relationships. And I think that primary care, until as a country, we figured out that primary care has to be the backbone of medicine. And we give primary care physicians the opportunity to spend the time that's needed to change behavior, we're not ever going to make a significant change for the health of our country. And I personally, am concerned with where healthcare is going in the United States. As more and more physicians are getting burnt out, as more and more nurses are leaving the medical field, there's not going to be enough providers. And we're seeing that with access. Certainly, my grandma called me the other day and she can't see her family med doc for like 6 months. And they're like, oh, just keep calling back every day and we'll see if something opens up. Luckily, she's healthy, but it's going to be a huge problem. And I think until we realize we have to shift the pendulum, until we realize the backbone of the medical system needs to be primary care prevention, making sure that instead of all the complications that come with diabetes, we're treating it before diabetes becomes a thing, we're not going to make a significant difference in the health of our country. And that's going to lead to so many devastating effects, not only in the civilian war, but in the military as well. And you, of course, have the military experience to understand what I'm talking about too. Anyways, we can take it from there, but I just think that it's concerning.
I agree with you. We are in a sick care system predominantly as it stands. And unfortunately, it's profits over people and churning RVUs and generating revenue. And the incentives are perverse, to be quite fair. And until we unwind that, which is going to take a lot of work, it's going to get progressively worse. However, I don't want to just end there. I do think there are entities and institutions and people who are doing amazing, wonderful things to right the ship, if you will. But, we're trying to, Zev Newworth, who wrote a great book, Beyond the Walls, often talks about trying to move an aircraft carrier. You can't just flip the thing around, right? It's not that easy. And so, for example, I do work with a group called Medicine Forward, and the mission statement is to help physician-patient relationships flourish to move medicine forward. And one of the things we're doing, we actually just had our first Catalyst conversation last night, is bringing patients and doctors together in different endeavors to talk about things. And part of this, because part of it's education. People don't realize what's happening on the other side of the fence. They will if they read my book. They'll get a big dose of it, I suppose. But the point I was trying to make is there is hope. There are wonderful entities out there really trying to change things, like the Kern National Network, whose focus is flourishing in medicine. So we have to unlearn that learned helplessness, because if we all just go, oh, what is one person going to do? Well, yeah, nothing ever will change. But Alex, if you do something such as the podcast and the work you're doing within the Air Force, if I do things and maybe some of the patients we see do some things, we're going to start to see some traction and we're going to start to see some pushback. And you can see it even with movements like direct primary care, which is happening all over the place. And that's, there are a lot of entities that aren't thrilled with direct primary care, and there are a lot of financial reasons why they're not happy with it. But ultimately, it's lower cost, it's better care, and it really embodies the quadruple aim.
Yeah, I love direct primary care. I had Dr. Leah Gupta on the podcast quite some time ago, and it was awesome. She's over near Chicagoland doing direct primary care. And yeah, it's incredible. I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think direct primary care gives you the opportunity to have the time to put the relationship first. I think back, and I think I've said this story on the podcast before, Todd, but you'll probably appreciate it. I had a patient who was coming in to see me, and it was just booked for obesity. And it was towards the end of my morning clinic. Right before I saw her, I saw that the last appointment of the morning canceled. So I was like, great, I know that I have some time with her, 40 minutes instead of like 20 or 10 by the time the tech gets her checked in. And so backstory for her, she's about 330 pounds, diabetes, hypertension, young gal, like in her mid 20s or almost 30, and diabetes, hypertension, morbidly obese, all these things. She comes in, is first time I ever saw her. We're just talking, very friendly, fantastic individual. And we're chatting. And I asked her, I said, well, how much exercise are you doing right now? And she was fairly motivated. You could tell she wanted to change. And she's like, right now, I'm not doing anything. I'm not exercising at all, but I want to. And so we just talked about like, hey, how about during the commercials of TV, when you're watching that, you just get up and walk in place during the commercials. And then how about you try and walk one block around your neighborhood? And then that's going to turn into 2 and then 3 and then go from there. Over time, she lost like 120 pounds. I took her off all of her medications. She ran her first 5K. She came and she booked an appointment with me. This is awesome. She booked an appointment with me just to tell me that she ran a 5K. Like, she's like, nothing's wrong. I told them that like something was, so they'd give me an appointment. But I just wanted to tell you that I ran a 5K. And it was amazing, and that came from having the time to talk with her, having an extra 20 minutes to talk with her, dramatically changed her life, saved the healthcare system millions of dollars. And that's just one person. The cool thing about that, and kind of thinking through ripple of change, the cool thing about that was she also came and she told me that she told her mom the exact same advice. She said her mom had the same health conditions as her, and she told her mom the same advice, and her mom has also lost over 100 pounds, is off all of her medication. And so it's just so cool to see, and that is what family medicine is all about. That is what you're looking for, I'm sure, in the healthcare system. That's what I'm looking for in the healthcare system. And that is what, as physicians, we sometimes feel powerless. That's why we got in, but we feel powerless because we don't have the time. We don't have the ability to really make those changes and change that behavior that's so important with patients.
That's an incredible story. And it speaks to those small interactions can have an incredible ripple effect, positive or negative. In this case, thank goodness it was positive. That's why I think we've all got to try and do something, even if it's just focusing on yourself and self-care and making sure, as if you're a clinician, that you're in the best place you can be to give the best to your patients. If that's your change as a result of hearing this, then we've won, then this podcast has been a success.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some things you learned as you were working on the book? Or, what are some things that Ripple of Change has changed in your life?
Oh, wow. Take a deep breath for this one. Hopefully I don't start crying. I think a lot of things beyond the obvious with my relationship with Joshua, who is my co-author. That in and of itself is incredible. It has been a key that's opened some amazing doors for me personally and professionally. Learned to say no more, even more than I did before, to set those boundaries. And as physicians, we often struggle with that. Recently, I learned that I had never really grieved a lot of things in my career. I've had the unfortunate exposure to 4 of my colleagues who have died by suicide, a friend from medical school, a fellow in residency, one of my partners, more recently an ER physician that was at the critical access. I never grieved those things. I just stuffed them into a box like I was taught and never opened that box or rarely looked at it. And frankly, it's wrong. It is wrong that we were taught that way. It is wrong if it's still being taught that way. It's important to compartmentalize for a moment, but eventually you have to unpack that. Because if you never do, when that box opens up, it's potentially going to be a complete mess. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is for those that haven't had a therapist or a coach or talked to a colleague and you're struggling with these things, please do so. The epidemic of physician suicide has got to stop. And these are some of the things that we need to be considering. I'm hoping that wasn't too heavy for the podcast, but I think it's critically important that we continue to talk about these things like the Lorna Breen Foundation is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, it saddens me to hear that. And, I think a lot of us have been touched by suicide of colleagues or folks we went to medical school with or folks we've worked with in the medical field. It's heartbreaking because a lot of times, this is something I haven't said on the podcast before. I was struggling with some burnout too. And I'm a young physician and people will probably be like, oh, well, back in my day or whatever. But I was struggling with burnout as well. And it was rippling to affect all aspects of my life, my job, my family, my relationships with friends. I remember thinking almost kind of I was powerless as a physician of like, oh, well, I can't go to see a therapist, or I can't, consider medication management or whatever that may be. And I think a lot of folks are probably in a similar boat. But then I had a friend of mine who he was active duty Marine, and he's like, Alex, what the hell are you doing, man? He's like, you're a doctor. You're telling people all the time to, go see a therapist. And here's some things that we can do to work on anxiety and depression and burnout and all these sorts of things. And you're not willing to do any of it. Like, what the hell? That's hypocritical of you. And so anyways, long story short, I decided to pursue a therapist and talk about medication management, those sorts of things, and just be open with my wife, which was just huge. And that's completely changed everything. And it takes a lot to do. I remember being so concerned with like, oh, well, what if, this happens and that happens, and the stigma that may or may not exist or whatever. And if you're a doc here, or you're a provider here, and you're listening to this and you feel like you're struggling with that too, please reach out to me or reach out to Todd. And it's worth it. As you said, it's worth it to talk to folks, whether that is a therapist or a counselor, or even being open with your spouse or your partner. It's worth it. It can be really helpful because we have to take care of ourselves first so we can take care of others.
100%. And if I get the concerns with credentialing or licensing or the state boards or what have you, I appreciate all that. Thank goodness there's a lot of efforts working to change that. Again, with the Lorna Breen Foundation or the work that's been done in Virginia with the Safe Haven Initiative. But there are other things out there that are anonymous. Physicians Anonymous is a perfect example of a safe space where you can go and spill your guts. So maybe that'll help somebody else. But the tide has to turn on this for sure. And I appreciate your comments, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Todd. Yeah. What do you think are some things that folks that are listening to this, of course, buying your book, but what are some other things you feel like physicians can do to kind of cause some positive change going forward, either big or small?
Well, yeah. And, I appreciate you talking about the book. And I guess I'll put my plug in here for the website. That sounds like an opportune time. Sure. rippleofchange.us is the website. It's also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. But if you want a cool signature, maybe I'll put a smiley face in there or something like that, then definitely go to our website. But I think the reality is, if you're in a situation where you feel stuck, I almost guarantee you are not alone. And there is somebody there who is feeling the exact same way. And starting that relationship or having those conversations, whether it's at a coffee shop or at a restaurant, can be super cathartic and might lead to some confidence, courage to possibly stand up for what is right and correct. And if that's not the case, there are groups out there that do have those support structures in place, whether it's coaching or other opportunities. So yeah, you're not alone. Reach out. There are thousands of us out there who would love to help in some capacity.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely include the website in the show notes as well. And I'm looking forward to an autograph and a smiley face in the book, which is awesome. That's really cool. What are some things, Todd, that you're working on going forward? What are some projects you're working on now?
Oh, wow. So I'm employed by emergency care specialists. It's about 200 emergency physicians, and I am the lone family physician in the group who is kind of like a built-in consultant. They've opened a clinic called the Right Care Clinic, which is between urgent care and the ER, if you think about it. So it's a clinic staffed by an emergency physician with CT, radiology, blood draw, IV fluids, IV medications, et cetera. But there's no ER facility fee. So if you got somebody that's got congestive heart failure, they're a little bit fluid overloaded, you think they just need maybe a chest x-ray, BNP, and a little bit of IV Lasix, bingo, you send them there, visits $300 or $400 instead of $1,500. Amazing new model that is really starting to gather attention and traction. The other cool thing that I'm working towards with this group is a direct care model where I will be the physician to the physicians, obviously cutting out some of the insurance/administrative layer there and saving money. But how cool is that, right? That you can just, text your physician and say, hey, I need to have a chat or appointment. Sure, let's get on the phone in 20 minutes and talk about what you need. So those are some cool things beyond the investment stuff and the angel investments in the book and speaking and all these other fun things. From a clinical perspective, those I'm very excited about.
That's awesome. How do you have the time, or how do you balance all these different things that you're working on?
At times I don't, Alex, and I regret those times. It's about, as you go further along in the networking path and in your career, you start to realize, like, what are the high yield places? What are the things that give you joy, right? And like doing this, imparting knowledge, public speaking, it gives me joy. It fills up my cup. I feel like I'm offering something, so I like doing it. And as you go through your career, if your gut's telling you, I don't know if I like this, I don't know if I want to do it, the answer might be no. And then, because if you say yes, you're saying no to something else potentially. So back to the balance question, the work I do with emergency care specialists is I work part-time, and we're not talking about a huge panel of patients that I'm going to be taking care of, and young, relatively healthy. And so that's limited, right? And I've gotten better with my networking about not taking every call under the sun and not accepting every opportunity that's out there. So it's a skill to say no, but it's one that is worth honing, because if you don't, you're saying no to your family, you're saying no to your friends, etc. And if it leads to concerns about job, throw the dart at the map, find another one.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I'll be throwing the dart in June of 2025. So we'll see where the Schloes end up. Looking forward to it. Well, that's awesome, Todd. Well, I appreciate your time. It's definitely impacted me, and I'm really grateful to have connected with you, and looking forward to see all the change that happens going forward from the book and everything that you're working on, and happy to help out in any way that I can from that perspective, because I am also very passionate that the healthcare industry needs to change, and we do have to band together, and we have to stand up for ourselves as physicians and as family medicine docs and as providers at large, in order to better take care of our patients going forward, because that's what really matters. So really grateful for your time. If folks want to reach out to you, connect with you, learn more, of course, we have the website rippleofchange.us. We'll include that in the show notes. Is there any other way folks can contact you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I would say from a social media perspective, that's probably the best way. If you message me on LinkedIn, there's a good chance I'll get back to you somewhat expeditiously. And thanks so much for having me. This has truly been a blessing and really a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Todd. Well, with that, it's been Dr. Todd Otten and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.